Once again, here in Studio One for the AskOkey podcast. No doubt you've been awaiting this with bated breath. As you know by now, Pete, Shill, Stooge, and General all-round dog's body to AskOkey, and the man who needs no introduction, the prof, the man himself, the brother, as he's been called by some of you. Thank you all for joining us. We've got an interesting podcast coming up. Tweeds, coats, shirts, and sort of odd assortment of topics in mind. First of all, thank you all once again for following, subscribing, liking, and clicking, and doing all those things that make all of what we do possible. Shouts to all of those who send comments. Comments positive or comments negative, all are welcome. As the man said, there's no such thing as bad publicity. So keep them coming, and we will do our best to keep answering. It does become a little bit of a challenge, so if you don't see your comment answered immediately, don't worry. Go away, go to sleep, wake up the next morning, and you'll find a response there from the prof or from me. Now, we have here, I think, the estate tweed of Clan McOkey. Oakey's Scottish cousins, when they're off shooting birds in the glen in August, they wear something approximating, at least, this particular pattern here. Prof, tell us about it.
Well, Pete, quite an introduction. It's kind of it's going to be very difficult to top that. However, I'll give it my good old college try.
The college try,
as they would say.
Yes.
This is a tweed. It's pretty beefy. It's got to be over 500 grams.
No, 1 moment. 500 grams in real measurements is what, about
a square meter?
20 ounces?
So no, 500 grams has got to be, I would reckon about 16, 17 ounces. 17
ounces, but there's a running meter.
Thereabout.
There we go.
Thereabout.
Good.
So this is by Fox.
Mm-hmm.
As most of my fabrics I tend to pick because I just believe they're very creative when it comes to design.
Nothing against our partner, Harris.
Nothing against...
We hasten to add.
Mark, nothing against you. You're my partner. You will be my partner for life, I hope, as they would say here in Inshallah.
Yeah.
But Fox does good work. Douglas, if you're watching this, Douglas Cordeau. Of course, we don't deal with Douglas, but we deal with Patrick.
Mm-hmm,
Patrick Osborne. Patrick Osborne Fox, Fox Osborne. Just a superb gentleman. He's our kind of our opposite on the other end.
Yeah.
But getting back to the cloth, so this is from the director's cloth or the director's choice or what have you, which they publish every now and then.
Mm-hmm.
They go into the archives and they pick out something from the archives and they recreate it. So I believe this is something that had been run a century ago.
I think so, yes.
And so this is a repro of it. Mm-hmm. But it's a beautiful brown plaid, or it's not quite, I wouldn't call it a window pane. It's more like a plaid with houndstooth patterns, a cream base, and sort of a brown houndstooth with these light blue
striking
overchecks.
Blue there. It's almost a royal blue.
Like a royal
check.
Blue overcheck. So,
and if you described it and somebody wasn't looking at it, he would say, nah,
it would never work.
But it actually does.
It does.
Surprisingly.
Because it's funny because these are all other earth tones.
Mm-hmm,
so the cream base, the brown, they're earth tones, and then blue isn't an earth tone, so to speak.
No, it's the sea or the river.
Exactly.
Running through the countryside.
It's quite an eye-catching contrast, and
it is.
The fabric just grabbed my attention, and I thought to myself, why? Wouldn't this make for quite an, as you would say, riveting three-piece suit.
Three-piece suit, yes, which it is. And I think the alternative might have been just a jacket, or maybe a single-breasted odd jacket.
I think it was actually designed as an odd jacket. And most of, if you notice, a lot of my three-piece suits are intended as odd jackets.
Yeah, yeah.
However, I have a tendency to sort of see beyond the rainbow. And I sort of project beyond the odd jacket and say, well, how would this look as a suit? And I wouldn't say it's hit or miss. I haven't had a major miss yet.
No.
But I have quite a few suits, a lot of these sort of what I would call expressive suits that are in fact intended as odd jackets.
Yes, yes.
But if you have the noose, am I pronouncing it right? Noose or nu?
The noose, yeah. Or the noose, yeah.
If you have the noose to sort of pull it off, as in New Yorkers would say, the chutzpah.
Right.
Then certainly you can sort of take a jacketing and make it into an entire outfit.
Into an outfit. And that sort of pattern, you tend to see at the racetrack.
True.
You're not going to see it in a boardroom exactly.
Provided the checks are not too large.
Yeah.
Okay. So say, for instance, look at that check behind you. Okay.
Several of them.
No,
yes.
there's one at the far end. At the
far
far
end.
end.
That
one.
Yes.
That's also by Fox. Now, that's a jacketing.
That could not be a suit.
And that could not be a suit. That could not be a suit. But there are other things, if you're a bit creative or if you're imaginative at the same time, sort of with a little bit of chutzpah, there are a lot of jacketings that actually can be done as complete suits.
Oh, I suppose you have to have an eye, because the trouble is, until you've made it up, you won't know exactly what it's going to look like. So you've got to be able to, as you said, see beyond the rainbow. And we have the interesting addition of the Balmoral boots, which I don't think we've seen before. On your feet, as it were. On the shelf, obviously. And these are the sort of boots that you could wear walking around in the countryside, and it's entirely appropriate, or they are entirely appropriate to the tweed, to the estate tweed.
Absolutely.
Now, question that came up from somebody, can't remember now, within the past few days was stripes and checks. And I noticed you're wearing a striped shirt. Okay, could you, for the benefit of our great listeners there, could you expound on said subject for a moment?
That's a good question. One which obviously I entertain very often across our social channels. I think the simple way to put it is, it's a very a lot of men avoid mixing patterns because it could go left very quickly.
Indeed,
very quickly. So a lot of men, they learn how to wear a navy suit and a white shirt and maybe an Hermes tie, a silk foulard tie with some little motifs and what have you, and that's it. But I think learning how to combine patterns is just really, it is the, how can I say, the coup de grace.
Right, okay, yes,
of men's dress. Because it's really like learning how to play instruments.
Right,
it's when you hear a production of Quincy Jones, for instance.
Right.
The complexity of it.
Sophistication. Sure.
The combination of all the instruments. You could tell it quickly apart from just sort of, a beginner. A beginner or what have you. So I think it's the same thing with dresses. When you learn how to combine patterns, right? Let's even keep color aside for now. Let's just talk about patterns.
Right.
It's like music.
Yes.
And the first rule, of course, is that you have to keep the scales separate. You have to differ the scales. Okay. You have to keep the scales entirely not separate, but they have to differ in size. So if you're going with small scales for the jacket, you have to go with large scales for the shirt, and then tie as well.
And a solid tie.
Well, you can also do 3 patterns. Like here, here I have 3 patterns. It's not very obvious. Now, if you
those little blue ones.
Exactly. With a tight shot, right? So I'm sure one of his cameras, is able to pick this up. If you have a tight shot of my tie, it's actually a silk foulard with prints with motifs on
Yes,
it.
little blue
With
prints.
blue
yes.
motifs which pick up the blue in the
Yes,
shirt
yes, yes,
and the
yes.
blue here.
Yes.
So it's sort of what I would call a little bit of an acquired art.
Yeah.
You understand the basics, right? The fundamentals, meaning sort of you vary the scales. You vary the scales between the coat and the shirt, or if you have sort of stripes in your ties, but beyond that, adding that third touch, like the third pattern, that really is what I call art form.
And you've got to think about the saturation. So you can have a stripe, but not too bright a stripe, for example.
Exactly.
Yes,
For
okay.
instance, this block stripe we have, if it were darker, if the blue were darker, okay, it would in some way undermine.
Yes.
It would undermine the coat.
Well, so you've got to be very careful because with a
You understand what I mean?
I do.
It would undermine the coat. And again, the centerpiece here is a suit, right?
Yes,
or the pattern.
Yes.
We don't want to undermine it.
No,
we want to complement it, but we don't want to undermine it. Now, I thought about going with a plain shirt. Right? But it just sort of kind of seemed like you didn't try enough.
So if you were going for a plain shirt, what color would the plain shirt be with that?
Actually, I had picked out an ecru shirt. Like a yellow ecru.
Okay.
Not white.
Right, okay.
I don't like doing white with country suits. White I like to reserve for your blues and grays, your city suits.
Sure.
Country suits I like to go with I like to play around
and you should.
with sort of.
Yes.
So I was gonna go with an ecru shirt, like a kind of cream ecru, light yellow. But I just thought to myself, oh, you're chickening out.
Right.
You're taking the easy way out.
Yes.
If you understand what I mean.
Yes.
And I said, challenge yourself a little bit. Think harder without embarrassing yourself, of course. How can you introduce a little bit more complexity? Just make it a bit more sophisticated. Just enough. Without sort of going over the ledge.
Yes, because there's a risk.
And that's how we came up with this combination.
There's a risk, Okey, that if you're wearing a pattern like that, there is a risk that it can be made to look slightly ridiculous.
Absolutely.
If you become too ebullient, as we might say. But I think that suit, you could maybe have a buff waistcoat, like a camel hair waistcoat might look quite elegant with that. This is 3 pieces, but we were talking another day about odd waistcoats. And you could probably wear an odd waistcoat with that suit.
Possibly. So long as the waistcoat is subdued.
And should it be lighter or darker than the suit? The waistcoat.
Like you said, a camel would work probably.
Yep.
Because it's a very neutral color.
Yeah, okay.
So like a plain camel, it doesn't compete with the suit. It just sits there in the background. Probably would work. Something else that could work, possibly, is something like a plain olive.
Right. Yes.
Without any patterns. Just a plain olive tweed with maybe just a little bit of surface interest. Could be sort of a light Donegal or just some kind of something to the fabric, a little bit of texture, but nothing that takes away from its basic color. So something like that sits in the background still, right? While offering contrast, but it sits in the background and allows the suit to take, front row.
And having gone to the trouble of getting the fabric and sorting out the tailor and everything, you don't want to go to all that effort and then kind of spoil it by 1 or 2 things that are just wrong for it. Do you know what I mean? And so you obviously you pick the pieces very carefully to put them together. Interesting. Now, if I can refer to my cheat book here, because I otherwise forget. Now, this is an interesting point. Somebody asked me not too long back. He said, why is it that the fabric makes the shape of the garment look different? And what he meant, I think, was you could have 2 jackets, and you've got this, because you have for example, 2 or 3 jackets cut almost identically to the same pattern, and yet one looks bigger and one looks smaller. Is it the fabric or is it the color that makes it do that?
It's a fabric, Pete. Because different fabrics tailor differently.
Okay.
Different fabrics tailor differently. Some fabrics have more volume.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's obvious.
Some are more spongy.
Right. Well,
Some are more spongy. Yeah. Some are more rigid.
So even if it's the same size, it might end up looking, or even being a bit bigger.
Entirely different. They could come out looking entirely different. And I know this because, I created my own personal patterns. And I've created garments based on the same pattern. And I could create 4 garments, 5 garments on 5 different fabrics, and they would all come out feeling even different.
Yeah. Because a tailor told me that once, and I remember because I used to do that. I would get 3 or 4 things made from exactly the same
block.
shape, the same block. And I remember telling the tailor this: why are the pants narrower this time than they were last time? He said, no, they're not. And I said, no, but they are, and because they look narrower and they feel narrower. And he held them up to each other, and he said, no, look, they're exactly the same size. And he said, sometimes it's the fabric. So I wanted to check if that was the case, and as you say, it is.
The fabric makes a significant amount of difference.
So if you have, for example, really thick fabric like that one, which, fairly thick, 18 ounces, it's just not going to look like, even if it's the same color, even if it were dark blue, it wouldn't look quite the same as a dark blue, say, 12 ounce or 10 ounce. No, I can imagine that. Interesting. Thank you very much, Prof, for that. Now, one point here. Yes. So from fabrics, we get to coats. We spoke some time ago a little bit about the camel hair polo coat. And I believe AskOkey is involved with a dress coat and is it another casual coat, or is it just the dress coat?
Or the dress coat and the polo coat.
But there's another coat.
And then we have a Balmacaan as well.
Now, what is a Balmacaan?
So Balmacaan is sort of, it's a casual coat. It has no structure.
Right.
It is the equivalent of a throw.
Right.
If you understand, or there's the Spanish cape.
Right.
There's the Spanish cape, formal cape that the Spaniards wear.
Right.
Which is just a piece of cloth you throw over.
Right.
So the Balmacaan was originally designed, I think intentionally was sort of essentially meant to be a blanket to be thrown over the body.
Right.
So it's cut wide in the body.
Yeah.
It's just basically a piece of cloth cut wide in the body with sleeves. Really, that's it.
Okay.
And it doesn't, there's no canvassing really. There's no structure to the coat. It's just cloth. And very often, if you do have a waist, you can actually create some shape using a belt.
Right, okay.
Right? Okay. And if you don't have a waist, then you don't have a waist. Then it's just really what it is, right? But
so it's a shapeless coat.
It's a shapeless coat, and it's meant to be that way. It's just basically meant to be a throw.
And where would you wear such a thing?
Casually in the country.
Right, okay.
In the country, like if you're out hunting, for instance.
Right, okay.
And you needed some warmth. Is the equivalent of grabbing a blanket and throwing it over your shoulders,
or around town on a casual day.
Well, I mean, it's not, because it's not a tailored garment.
Yeah,
so
okay.
if you're going into town, you presume you're going to, it's an occasion.
Does it have a raglan sleeve or?
Yes, yes, 100%, of course. So that's why I say it's a throw. So it's literally almost sort of like throwing a blanket over your shoulders. So it doesn't have, there's no structure at all to it.
No. So how many yards do you need for one of those?
So it depends, obviously, it depends on your proportions, how tall you are, how big you are.
About 6?
So if you're about 6 foot tall, an overcoat period, I would recommend starting at 4 meters, right? If you're one of those kind of knee freezers, like some of these, I beg your pardon, Italian coats that you see, that stuff that look like mini dresses. people have those made for 3.5 meters, but if you
Yes.
want a proper full length coat, a proper
Yeah.
full length
Yeah.
coat, if you're 6 foot tall, you're looking at least 4 meters.
Yeah.
And then just for insurance, especially if you're working with patterns, you want to have at least 4.5 meters on hand.
Now, this is interesting because you might say, well, what's the point of an overcoat that only comes down to the top of your knees? It's not really an overcoat, it's just a long jacket. There was a thing, or there is a thing, they call the car coat, which used to be, I remember in the 70s, they used to be able to buy them, they were called car coats.
Mm-hmm.
And they were sort of like a short raincoat that you wear in the car.
Correct.
But you've got to be very careful, because if you get down to about mid-shin, if you get only about 2 inches more, it looks silly. So you have to be very careful with that length. Now, how long is the AskOkey Balmacaan? Sort of mid-shin?
Mid-calf.
Mid-calf.
All our coats. All our
Okay.
coats are mid-calf, and at least to my eyes, right? I mean, I am my word is far from canon with everything design or proportion, but I think for anything that has a skirt to it, mid-calf is perfect. So for instance, our morning dress.
Right.
I use the same principle. There are those who cut a morning dress to stop at the back of the knee, right? I just think it looks a bit silly. It looks a
little bit too short, yes.
Right?
Yes.
So, for our dress coats, all our dress coats, our polo coats, Balmacaan, including our morning dress, anything that flows, I like it to stop at the mid-calf.
Yeah, okay. And because if you
then if you're shorter, maybe you could sort of like, stop a little bit higher than that.
Right, maybe. Yes.
But for sure, definitely below the knees.
Yeah.
If you're shorter, you might want to stop just at the knee or slightly below the knee.
Why?
Because in just sort of illusion.
Okay, I see what you mean. Yes.
When you're shorter, when you're shorter, you want to expose as much leg as possible.
Right.
So if you are all the way down to mid-calf, right, there's not really that much left.
No, true.
So you don't want to kind of feel like you're kind of coat and shoes.
Yes, of course, yes.
Right?
Yes.
But if you're tall, then even if you go down to mid-calf, you still got quite a bit of length left.
True. Yeah, okay. So these are full-length overcoats. Now, what do you think about a fur collar on your dress coat? Because sometimes you see that. Or sometimes you see a velvet collar.
It's very rare that I see it tastefully done.
Right, okay. Yeah.
It just screams, I don't want to mention the name of the country, but oligarch.
Right, yes.
There's a company that actually really makes a lot, has developed quite a large clientele with such, in my own view, gaudy outfits. I don't remember the name of the company now. It's an Italian. I think we've talked about it before.
Right.
Stefano Ricci.
Right. Yes.
And my goodness, those things are not cheap.
No.
He's expensive, and then he gets business.
Sure.
So there's a market for that sort of thing.
Well, I think Bijan's used to do that.
Well, Bijan
out in Los Angeles.
Bijan kind of doesn't manufacture, right? So it orders from different makers, and then it does some of its own design. But Stefano Ricci is an example of a brand that really is over the top. So they specialize in things like those, like shearling collars, made out of the rarest type of fiber.
Yeah, that's right. Yes,
alpaca.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
Sort of the most exclusive
goats, of which there are only 3 in the world.
Only 3 in the world, and then one
live
died
at the top of Mount Everest.
Living on top of that, and you have to go out there. So that is what they specialize in, Stefano Ricci, and they built a very handsome business on the back of that. There's a specific clientele that love it.
Sure.
They're oligarchs I wouldn't mention from what country, but I presume everyone could guess. But I think for our coats, the farthest I would go would be to do a velvet collar.
Right.
Sort of like a Chesterfield.
Yeah.
I would do a velvet collar on a dress coat just to offer a little bit of contrast and just sort of richness. But I wouldn't do anything beyond that.
No, indeed. And now, you mentioned the coats. You mentioned the Balmacaan coat and how it's sort of loose. And it got me thinking about the perennial topic which we have on our social media. And daily, I still see, and I continue to see, I'm sure you see, the references to the width of the lower garment, shall we call it that. Should I be able to feel the cloth against my legs is the question. And this came up in another instance. How loose can they be before they start to become bags or tents?
Ooh, Pete, the perennial question.
Yes.
How wide is wide?
How wide is wide?
Or how wide is wide? Or how wide is too wide?
How wide is swimming? Yeah.
Oh boy. Look, I think everything in life, because this is a very, very sensitive subject, and it deserves every minute we can give it, because obviously it's one of the most controversial things that we've had to deal with.
Indeed.
From the genesis of this platform. Now, I think that let us first begin by defining what people consider normal.
Right.
And I always say this, because this is the age of social media.
It is.
And people are accustomed to seeing people either marketing their garments or their wares on social media. And when you photograph slim trousers, right, it looks a certain way. It looks sort of linear. It looks clean. It's well. It's well behaved in front of a camera. That is one view. When you photograph full cut trousers, they are not always flattering, right? Because of the fullness. Depends on the angle. They can be flattering, but not always, because it's a lot of cloth.
Yeah, it is.
Really.
Yes.
And sometimes the camera doesn't always catch it in its best angle.
Fair enough.
Now, that is the visual or the aesthetics. Let's talk about functionality. The fact is, those slim trousers, they're not nearly as functional as full cut trousers. True. I mean, look at me. See how I'm sitting?
Yeah.
I have fairly decent sized thighs. And when I cross my legs, you can almost feel the fabric is almost grabbing my legs. As wide as these trousers are.
Yes.
Still, I can sort of feel them starting to bind.
Right.
Now, imagine if I were wearing slim cut trousers.
Indeed.
You might have heard a rip by now. So I think, how wide is too wide? I mean, there are two elements there. There's the aesthetics of it, and then there's the practicality of it.
Right. Yeah.
Trousers are meant to be worn. They're meant to be the dynamic.
They're a functional garment.
They're functional garment. Yeah. So you stand up, you sit down, you gait, you walk, you run, what have you. It is not this thing you stand in front of Instagram with all the time.
That's right. Yes.
So people need to really kind of adjust their idea of what a trouser should look like. They see these things on Instagram that sit still and they look, almost like a perfect figure.
Yes.
But that's not, a trouser is not designed to be worn for photographs on Instagram or on social media.
No. It's quite correct. It's like
you
like
you
seeing
have
something
to look
in a shop and then taking it home.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what is the right width for your trousers? They first of all, when you sit down, okay, someone made a comment on the last video we shot, on the last podcast we shot, and say, "Oh, look at Pete's trousers are all the way up to his armpits."
They are indeed, yes.
And you responded to the comment, and I supplemented your response by saying, "Well, you have to sit into the trousers.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Now I'm wearing a
look, see,
waistcoat,
there they are,
so you,
right up there.
I'm wearing a waistcoat, so you can't see my waistband. But for
Yeah.
the purposes of this exercise, I'm just gonna open up my waistcoat. Here we go.
See, prop flashing here.
Yes, we're gonna
There we are,
flash.
yes.
Barely flash. Now, look where, Pete, if you would
That's right,
unbutton
yes.
your coat.
Oh yes.
Okay.
Yes, there is.
Look where our trousers are sitting.
Indeed.
Okay, just stand next to me.
Right
here.
There we are.
Look where I'm slightly taller than you, so just you can see.
Right,
That's
little
a
bit
counter,
up,
but
little
just
bit
a
up,
little
yes.
bit high.
That's
But
it.
the point is that it's sitting in the same place,
Yep,
right
they are.
at the natural waist, at the navel.
Yep, that's it.
Now,
There's the navel.
The
Yep.
point I'm trying to make is this. See, this is a lot of room here. This is a lot of room here. Now, when you're standing, it's self-explanatory.
Yes,
when you're
yes,
walking,
yes.
right?
That's right,
You need
yes.
that room for
You
movement.
do.
But
Yes,
when
right.
you sit, okay, when you sit, look at this. When you sit, what do you do when you sit? You sit into the
That's
trousers.
right. Yep.
And when you sit, look what happens.
Yep.
My waistband doesn't get in the way.
No, indeed. Well, mine comes up, you see. There.
Okay? It's
Yeah.
up here. It doesn't get
That's
in
right.
the way
Yeah,
of
yeah.
me sitting down.
That's right,
I
yes.
stand up
Yep.
and I
And then you
sit down.
and there we are. Yes.
All I need to do is just pull up I just need to lift my trousers a little bit
That's
and I
right.
sit down. It's very
And
comfortable.
there we are. Yes.
The waistband doesn't get in the way.
Yeah.
Now, imagine if my trousers were lower,
Yep.
sitting here.
Yep.
When you sit down here, especially when you wear it with a belt,
Yep.
what happens?
Yep, that's
You
it.
feel a binding
Oh, indeed. Yes.
right away.
Yes.
Do you understand
Yes,
what I mean?
of course.
When you, again, watch this, okay? When you have your trousers sitting here at the hips, especially when they're worn with a belt, when you sit down, you feel an immediate
Yeah,
discomfort.
of course you
It
do.
binds your hips because your hips
yes,
expand when you sit down. So two things are happening. You're putting a lot of undue stress on the waist of the trousers. And that's why you see a lot of belts. When you buy a belt, in a matter of a few months, it's bent out of shape.
Of course, yes.
You know why? Because that sitting down and standing up, you keep stretching the belt.
Yep.
You keep stretching the belt because the trousers are sitting at the wrong place. If your trousers are sitting here, even if you wore a belt, the belt is under no pressure. There is no tension on the belt.
Yep.
Do you understand? Because all of that tension is in the hips,
Yep.
right here when you
That's
sit
right,
down.
yep.
So how wide should your trousers be? Is that they need to be cut full enough in the seat and in the hips,
Yep.
such that when you sit down, it doesn't interrupt your movement.
That's right. Well, what's really
The waistband
yeah.
the waistband is up here, okay, at the natural waist where it should be, so that when you bend down, okay, look at
Right.
me,
Yep.
okay,
Yep.
the fulcrum. Look at my fulcrum. My fulcrum is my natural. When I bend down,
Yes.
it bends at my fulcrum,
That's right.
and so that the trouser, nothing gets in the way
That's right.
of me reaching down.
That's right. Yes.
Okay? When I move around, nothing gets in the way.
Yep.
My movement is very fluid.
Yep.
If I had my trousers sitting here, each time I do
Oh,
this,
I know. Yes.
I can't go further than this.
No, indeed. Yeah.
Because the waist binds you.
Yeah.
It keeps your hip from
Yep.
flexing further.
Yep.
When your trouser is at your natural waist, it's completely out of the way. And such that this is where I'm flexing. My hips expand. When they go that way, there's plenty of cloth here
Sure.
that basically doesn't limit my
That's right.
ability
That's right.
to reach
Yes.
to the ground
Yes.
and to pick up a coin.
Hence.
Not to mention enough room here such that nothing rips.
Yeah.
Okay? I can do this.
That's right.
I can touch my toes.
There
I
we
can
go.
pick up a coin. I can pick up this. You don't hear anything.
Yeah.
If I were to do this with those tight trousers, I can't. I can't even reach.
No, you wouldn't be able to.
I would, even if I were athletic enough,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to reach down here.
No.
So there is your
There's your answer.
answer.
There's your answer.
In a very big, if you'd allow me, I'll button up my waistcoat.
Yes, want to be decent there, Prof. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
There is your answer in a very big nutshell.
Yeah. A very large nutshell. So the curious thing there is, of course, that what ought to be functional is not, and what you've done with your design is to make it functional as well as decorative. And obviously, this is the objective with any kind of design, isn't it? Is that what you're designing has to fulfill its
Function
purpose,
and form.
functional form. And really, what you end up with, as you said, is clothes in which you wouldn't feel comfortable or which would constrict you in some way. And the point about the design that you've championed is to make them functional and decorative and elegant looking, and to demonstrate that you can in fact have both. You can have function and you can have form as well. Curious that, and I hope the people who write these comments on the social media are listening, are watching, and taking note of what the Prof has said. Now, on that subject, is there such a thing as an American style for menswear and, say, a British style for menswear? Or are they all sort of much of the same?
Well, I think generally when people invoke the term American, it's usually not a complimentary term, if you understand what I mean. It's usually associated with looseness and bagginess and things of that nature.
Really?
Well, of course, because Americans are generally bigger.
Ah, okay, right.
Okay,
yes.
Their morphology, Americans are just because of the diet. And,
Yeah.
And it's not even a question of evolution, because most Americans, at least the European ones, came from Europe, right? But obviously the American diet is a lot richer.
Yeah, okay.
So Americans tend to be bigger.
Right.
And so when they say the American cut is, they refer to a cut that is meant to accommodate
Right.
that excess, sort of that large frame. So I don't think there is any such thing as the American cut. It's just certain brands that, let's say, are American, understand their market.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So we're talking about things like old suit makers like Just A Bank, Hartschaffner Max,
Right.
even Oxford.
Right.
So if you think about all the traditional older American suit manufacturers, they typically cut what might be construed as a sack coat.
Right.
Because your average American executive, which is their customer, right, is a middle-aged man. It's gotten quite a ways in the meat, in the meat section.
Yes.
So they create a product that's their market.
Right, okay.
So I think that's what people mean, or what they refer to when they talk of the American cut. There is really no such thing, at least in my opinion, as an American cut.
Yeah.
Of course, you have the sack cut.
Right.
The sack cut, but I don't think it's something that you could call expressly American. It's been adopted by a lot of companies that cater to the American market, just for reasons I explained earlier.
Yeah.
But I don't think the sack cut is natively American.
No.
So to answer your question, I don't think there's an American cut or a British cut. I don't think so. I think companies, depending on their market, have to determine what cut gives them the highest chances of being successful.
Yes. Now, this leads on to, well, it doesn't exactly, but let's pretend it does. This leads on to another thing, and that is mood. Now, can your clothes have a mood? I mean, humans have moods, right? And they're angry or they're happy or something. Can you make your clothes fit a certain mood? For example, is there such a thing as a happy color or a cheerful suit? Would we call this a cheerful? I'm not sure that we'd actually call it cheerful, but we certainly wouldn't call it sad, this particular suit that you have. It's hard to think of that as a sad suit, isn't it? Or a somber. It's not a particularly somber suit. Do we associate, for example, do dark colors automatically mean somber or subdued or pensive, for example.
Well, I think historically we've always associated dark colors with seriousness, serious occasions.
It's curious that, isn't it? Yes.
Sober occasions. So I think we talked about this in the last session, where did the color black come from?
Well, this is interesting because if you look at certain countries, I mean, remember Diana Vreeland famously said of India that pink is their navy blue. And certain colors that might seem very, very loud to us in certain parts of the world wouldn't. Might just seem to be a color. For example, in China, they wear white at funerals, whereas we wear black. You see.
I didn't know that.
You see, and so because white is associated with that sort of serious occasion. So I was wondering about this. So if, for example, you want to be particularly forceful, or you're feeling particularly forceful, or that you're angry is not the word, but highly motivated to do something, are there certain colors or certain designs that you could pick to kind of get that mood across?
Well, it's a multifaceted question in the sense that there are two things here. Who do you seek to influence, yourself or your audience?
Well, I would hope your audience.
Well, that's the point.
I mean,
when you talk about mood, right, there is the inwards looking sense of a mood.
Right.
For instance, it's sort of being, in a manner of saying, being self-hypnosis.
Right, okay.
And there are certain colors or certain outfits one could wear to achieve that state of self-hypnosis, right? And that's one purpose. And it could be a valid reason for picking certain colors.
Yes.
But there's also the other, which is, I think, more general, is having a certain effect or making a certain impression on your audience.
Right.
So these are two completely different things.
Yes, indeed, yes.
So when you talk about mood, the question is, whose mood are you looking to influence? Your own mood or the mood of your audience?
Yes.
Now, if the question or if the answer is the mood of your audience, then I think that's self-explanatory because historically, certain colors have been associated with occasion.
Sure.
A sense of occasion, soberness. Whether it's business setting, we talked about it last time, how the frock coat and the stroller were black for a reason because they communicated a certain level of soberness and austerity.
That's right.
And a Calvinistic spirit,
right?
Which are all virtues in a serious
in the business world,
in the business setting. Whereas you would think about a soiree, a garden party, Mardi Gras, things of that nature, where you sort of let the colors
where
come
black
out,
would be perhaps
completely
less
out of place.
So
I think in that sense you could use color. Color is used to communicate a sense of occasion.
Right.
One.
Right.
The deeper question, I think, is something that are much more philosophical, even spiritual, is how does what we wear, right? How does it influence us? How does it even hypnotize us?
The wearer. Yes.
And I say that for a reason, because if you've read The Prince by Machiavelli,
right.
There's a chapter where he said before he went to write, he would dress himself in robes of gold and ornaments because it gave him direct access to divinity.
Yes, that's right.
And so there are those who believe that the way you clothe yourself actually gives you access to a higher being, a higher power.
Yes, I think that's a bit that's maybe stretching it, but there's no doubt about it that if you put on a jacket and stiff collar and a tie, you tend to feel a certain way. Where if you're just wearing your slopping around clothes, your pullover t-shirt and your shorts or something, you're perhaps not going to get into that particular mood. And so, for example, some people have to get their work clothes on before they can really work, and perhaps that's part of it, sort of getting into the role, shall we say, getting into the role. I know that actors have told me that putting on costumes really enables them to get into the character,
transforms them into the character.
Yeah, which they can't really do
if they don't have the costume
quite
on.
Before they, especially for sort of historical dramas, period dramas, and things. So that may be part of that self-hypnosis. I think Machiavelli probably meant that he had to get his imagination going, and therefore he put on this outfit. And I think, who was it? Was it Zane Grey, who used to wear, the writer of Westerns, who used to wear sort of Western outfits, and his writing table looked out on this huge piece of open range, and I think that's where he got his inspiration from. Anyway, all very interesting. I think that's all we've got time for.
That went
We're
real quick.
to the end. Yes, it did, very, very quickly, and obviously quite a lot yet to be discovered, and no doubt topics for another podcast. So thank you all very much. Great pleasure as always. Well, of course, it's fun for us doing it, and we hope that you enjoy watching it and take away one or two useful things. So thanks very much again, and honorable mention to all of you who have been watching faithfully. Bye for now from me and from the Prof.
Thank you.
Cheerio.
Thank you for
Cheerio.
having me.
Most welcome. Thanks.
Thank you for having
Thanks
me.
for coming.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for coming.